We're learning now Perik Sheni, Los Chometz Matzah, which has to do with the mitzvah of Hashbosas Chometz, and it has 19 halachas. The Rambam starts in Perik Beis, Halacha Aleph, mitzvah asay min haTorah lahashbos Chometz koydem zman isur achilosoi. The mitzvah is to get rid of the Chometz before the time that it's also to eat it, as it says in Shmois, Vayom HaRishon. We learned before that means on the 14th day of Nisan, Tashbisu Sermon B'Techem. When Pi Hashmua Lamdu, when Pi Hashmua we learned, Rishon Zehu Yom Abo. So Rishon is the 14th day of the month. The Maggid Mishnah cites the Gemara. Chometz from 6 hours and further is also, because it says Shivas Yom Soili Motzi V'Botechem. 7 days Chometz should not be found. And it says Ach B'Yom HaRishon Tashbisu. How do you reconcile only 1 day? So the Gemara says Ach B'Yom HaRishon comes to tell us that the day before on Erev Pesach, and from the 14th the Chometz is also, it should be already gone from before Pesach. This proof to this is Mashakosu B'Torah. We find in the Torah, you're not allowed to slaughter on Chometz Dam Zivchi, and we're talking here, do not sacrifice, slaughter the Pesach, while you still have Chometz. The time of slaughtering the Pesach is the 14th day after Chatzos. This statement of Rovim, Sochim Hey, and the Perik Aleph is brought down in Halacha Ches, as we learned. Lomad Rambam, the Rambam learned it from a posik that it's forbidden to eat it. Chometz, from when? From the hour that you can slaughter the Pesach. Now, the fact of the matter is, even though you slaughter the Pesach after, you're supposed to slaughter it after the Tomid Shalbeinu Aboyim, but the time that one may actually slaughter it is from Chatzos, from the midday. After 6 hours have passed, at the beginning of the 7th hour. The Kesef Mishnah asks the question, why does the Rambam bring also the limud of Lo Yisishchat? What does he add with that? And he answers that from Ach B'Yom HaRishon, I wouldn't know from what hour of the day before Pesach one has to do so. Therefore, it tells us that from what hour do you do it? From the hour that you can bring the Korban Pesach. So the Kesef Mishnah asks the question, if that's the case, by Yom HaRishon, that we learned it means the Yudalad, why do I need that? What does that come to tell us? And he answers that it comes to tell us that one has to be rid of it on the 14th. So we need both to know which day and what time. And this is the Pirush of the Divrei Rambam. This is the way we explain it. Mitzvah say, it's a positive commandment to get rid of Chometz before the time of that it's also to eat it, because it says Ach B'Yom HaRishon Tashbisu. The Torah explained that the tzivui, the commandment, is to get rid of it before the 7 days of Pesach. And a proof that Ach B'Yom HaRishon is talking about the 14th, you learn from the Pasuk Leisishchat al Chometz Dam Zivchi, that you shouldn't shech the Pesach while Chometz is still there. Thus, we see that Yom HaRishon is Yom Yudalit. Otherwise, the psukim contradict each other. Because if we're going to say that Yom HaRishon means the first day of Pesach, then how can the Torah say you're talking about the time of slaughtering the Korban Pesach? That's on the 14th. That's why you need both psukim. So the Kesef Mishnah asks the question, even if we wouldn't know this din, that's the posuk, we'd have to say so. Because how else would we explain it? And he answers that without the limud, from what we would make a mistake that Yom HaRishon means the night of the 15th. As the Gemara says, you could say that we're talking about the night of Pesach. This is what we find in Psochim Dalam and Beis. From the Posuk Leisishchat al Chometz, we learn that we're talking about bringing any yeast with any korbanos, which is yeast is forbidden to be brought on the mizbeach. We would have such a mistake. And we bring a raya from a brisa. Ach b'yom harishon tashbisu sermon b'techem erev yontif. The brisa says it means the eve of Pesach. Maybe it means yontif, meaning the first day of Pesach. So it says lo shishchat al chometz dam zivchi. Don't slaughter the Pesach when you have chometz kayim. So you see that without the posing of Shishchat, we wouldn't understand Ach b'yom harishon correctly. The Goros HaRamach asks a question from Perek Aleph Halacha Ches. There the Rambam states and establishes that if you eat chometz erev Pesach after the 6th hour and the beginning of the 7th hours, you get Malchus Minat Torah. Thus, the Zman Hashbos is chometz, and the Zman of Achila is at the same time, not as we've learned till now, that you get rid of the chometz at midday, and it's also to eat from at night. How then does he say over here that it's talking about get rid of chometz before nightfall, and we learn only from Chatzos from the second posuk. Furthermore, he asks, here it seems that Hashbos So'er is only a mitzvah asay, as it says, mitzvah asay to get rid of chometz before the time of eating it. And from Rava we learn from Lo Yisishchat al chometz dam sivchi that there's a negative commandment as well, and he stops with a tzorach iyun, that it needs more depth. But it could be that we can explain that it would only say Ach b'yom harishon tashbisu. I would think that from the 14th day on, we have to get rid of chometz somehow, because it must be talking about before Pesach. And if it would say just 7 days you shouldn't have chometz, I would learn that the chiyuv is to get it before the 7 days, like Rashi says, but we don't know when. But once we have the Isser of slaughtering the Korban Pesach while the chometz is present, we know that we are stopping even from Chatzos. The Ramach asked this question because he understood the same way other commentaries do, that even if it would say Shivas Yom Soli and Motiv, we could explain that Yom HaRishon he should get rid of the chometz, but once it's Ach b'yom harishon tashbisu, which is a miyut, that you only need chiyuv tashbisu at the beginning of the 7th hour, but not before that. And that's a machlokes of Rashi and Tosfos. And the Rambam learns like Rashi that there's an obligation to get rid of chometz from the 7th hour, that it has to be done before the 7th hour and not at the 7th hour itself, and that's why it's a bit confusing. Furthermore, we can add, according to the Rambam in Halacha Beis, you can accomplish Hashboso by saying I nullify it, since at the moment that the 7th hour comes into being and chometz is also according to the Rambam, then you can't be mevatel that anymore. Thus, it must be that you cannot learn that the Torah told you to get rid of it, because the main getting rid of is being mevatel, and that can be after you no longer have possession of it. Therefore, it must mean before the time that it's also. But according to those who say the tashbisu is the actual burning and consuming of the chometz, you can say that would take place even after the time that chometz is also, because you could do it at the beginning of the 7th hour. I might think that tashbisu means from the 7th hour. According to Tosfos, that they ask how could Rava learn from like Sishchat that chometz is also from 7 hours and from the 7th hour after the 6th hour. One can only shecht after in the evening the Pesach as a Mishnah, and he answers that since the Torah commanded to get rid of it, and it said you shouldn't shecht, it's a svoru that it has to be at the time of the shchitos when it's forbidden, and not at a specific time, but rather when each an individual does it. That's when he should have to get rid of it. Therefore, the logic tells us that you have to do it at the time of when you can bring shchita. It doesn't mean the person individually, but rather the time when shchita is available available to everyone on Erev Pesach from Chatzos. Thus we see is not only talking about the time of Chatzos, but it's talking about the idea of before you bring the korban, as well as Chatzos. According to this, we can conclude that the question of the Ramach, that there's no lav, is answered, because the Loi says that it says Loisishchad al Chometz Dam Sivchi tells us that the one who slaughters it, the Korban Pesach, when the Chometz is in Meshusoi, is liable for having done an Aveira. And it's not referring to the actual lav of, meaning that everybody is under this lav. It's just telling us that an individual who shechs, as we'll see later in Korban, we'll see in Korban Pesach, there's a whole question as to who is liable for slaughtering the animal if the owner has chometz in his rishus. Is the kohen liable or the owner? But it's not totally in Chatzos, but that would be totally in the time of Shechita. However, between the two psukim, we understand that since it has to be done Erev Pesach, and there's a posuk that it says, mentions the idea as well with chometz, with getting rid of chometz. Therefore, we understand that prior to Chatzos, one has to get rid of their chometz. In the next year, we'll start Halacha Beis.